This is Bart Schwartz. I'd like to welcome you all to our fifth CAC meeting. I'd like to thank all the CAC members who are here participating, those who've continued to participate in the past. We really appreciate your joining us. And as I think everyone knows, we're streaming this meeting live, so everyone is able to participate or at least hear the deliberations and discussions that we're having. From the beginning, working with the residents has been a cornerstone of our efforts, and we continue that by having these CAC meetings followed by community meetings. So far, we've finalized a number of action plans, and there's still some more to be approved, and we'll discuss all of that. I think Dan will be talking about a lot of that going forward. The last community meeting we had was on January 9th at the Jacob Reese Community Center at the Queensbridge Houses. And the next community meeting will be in the Bronx at the Melrose Community Center on March 9th at 6 p.m. Melrose Community Center, March 9th at 6 p.m. And I hope many can join us. We've had excellent participation at the community meetings, and it's been very helpful to hear directly from the residents. So please join us if you can. I'd like to take a moment particularly to thank one member of the CAC community, if I can call it that, and that, who's not at our meeting today, but that's Chief Elvio Capocci. And I know representing the NYPD is Inspector Kiernan Creighton today. Welcome. I single out Chief Capocci because a few weeks ago, as many of you know, a NYCHA employee was shot by, a supervisor was shot by one of the employees when the supervisor was trying to do his job. I went and visited the employee at the hospital and with his family, a number of us did, and he was understandably quite frightened because the shooter was still at large, and at the time there was no protection for him, although efforts were being made to keep his identity secret while he was at the hospital. But in fact, many people knew where he was. So we called through the CAC. We called Chief Capocci, and before we left the hospital, arrangements were being made and were completed to make sure that there was protection for this employee. And it obviously meant a great deal to him, but it meant a great deal to all of us. So again, my thank you to you, Inspector, and please pass along our thank you.
Will do.
Thank you. I also wanted to say that one of our CAC members and Resident Association President, Robert Hall, who has been at all our meetings, has taken it upon himself to invite the residents in the community on Wednesday, February 19th, to come together in light of this shooting. And I'd like to thank you, Mr. Hall, for all that you do, and I appreciate that you're doing that. I don't know if it's really part of the program, but if there's something you want to say about it at the moment, please do.
Well, first of all, I want to thank you for showing up at the hospital. The TA president, Barbara LeRae, did get that across. She was very, very happy at the response. And I believe at this point right now, everyone is somewhat traumatized by this event. So I just took it that there needs to be some type of intervention. So I've spoken to a few people. I'm really hoping that the chairman can make an appearance, but I know this is a tight schedule and it's just short notice. But I think the development would be a lot better off if we had some type of management from a crisis standpoint of view. So I'm trying to facilitate that, and I'm assisting Barbara LeRae. And I really hope this helps the community and helps NYCHA all the way around, because everyone needs help.
Right, and I know that Greg Russ, the CEO and chairman, was following this very closely, very concerned about it, and I know that Vito visited as well, so I'm sure you'll have the full support, and whoever can be there will be there. It is a tight schedule, but I know you can be sure that the management of NYCHA supports, wants to support him and support what this stands for.
Okay, thank you.
So thank you. And Asha, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. Again, my name is Asha Muldrow on the monitors team, and welcome everyone. We really appreciate you being here and all of the input and advice and guidance that you've given on so many important issues that are important to the residents of NYCHA. So thank you. Welcome. I wanted to go over the agenda for this evening. We are going to hear an update from the monitor and deputy monitor. We're going to get an update from HUD Regional Administrator Lynn Patton. And then we're going to hear presentations, first from HUD Office of Prevention, Recovery, and Transformation, Daniel Sherrod, who's joining us by phone this evening. And then Councilwoman Alika Ampry-Samuel will speak on elected official funding. Then Eva Trimble, who's the Executive Vice President for Strategy and Innovation for the Office of the Chair at NYCHA, will present. And then the Office of the Deputy Mayor, Vicky Bean, Hallie Stein is here to present. Sorry about that. And then Resident Association President Nancy Ortiz will speak about the recertification process. And FDNY Community Affairs Director Caro is here, and he will speak as well. So thank you for all the formal presentations, and then the remainder of our CAC members will give brief remarks, and we will close our discussion. Okay, so now I'd like to turn it over to Bart and Dan, please.
Yes, thanks, Sasha. So again, I'm Dan Brownell. The last 2 meetings I was sitting in the corner, now I get to sit at the big table. So anyway, the monitor's 3rd report came out a week ago. And so I want to highlight some of the things in there. But one of the things I want to bring people's attention to is that the 1-year anniversary of the settlement agreement was last Friday, January 31st. It's hard to believe that whole year was going by. So as Bart indicated, one of the big things that we've been working on this first year, especially the last 6 months, are the action plans. So the first major action plan to be approved by the monitor was the heat action plan, which was approved on December 5th. And in many ways, that's sort of become the model for the other action plans. And as Bart has said a lot of times, you know, the whole point of an action plan is it states in very specific detail what's going to happen, by when it's going to happen, and what are the resources going to be, and how NYCHA is going to obtain those resources and actually make the things happen in the plan. And I have to say that Eva's crew worked on this very hard with the heat department, including some people from the monitor team, and really did a great job. And quite frankly, our job as the monitor going forward, more than anything else with regard to heat, is to work with NYCHA to make sure that all the things listed in the action plan, and there are a lot, are actually going to get done, and done in a timely fashion. And then the next major action plan to be approved, which was the week before last, was the elevator action plan. And as I indicated, this very much is modeled on the structure of the heat plan. And so, you know, we're going to be working with the elevator department or elevator division at NYCHA to make sure those things are done. And a big aspect of the elevator plan, of course, are all the replacements that are going to happen. And so the agreement requires that by 2024, 275 elevators at NYCHA will be replaced. In fact, NYCHA's plan at this particular point is that 281 elevators will actually be replaced. And then another thing that we're working with NYCHA's data and IT department is to generate an elevator heat map. And the point of that is to collect data. And for the elevator division, it was in pretty bad shape, to be quite frank, unlike the heat department. And so NYCHA, with us, has worked on having that data be much more accurate, especially in terms of what are known as the failure codes when an elevator breakdown occurs, so that more specific exact information is entered into Maximo's database, Maximo, so that the cause of elevator breakdowns is more accurately stated. And so the whole point of the elevator heat map is to really locate those elevators with the biggest problems in NYCHA, and of course, what are the actual causes of the breakdowns, so that NYCHA and the monitor team has a much better understanding of the current circumstances. And then the other thing, big thing that we've been working on, and this was an action plan that was approved by the monitor in November, is what's been called the GDA. Just to remind you, that's the $450 million in reimbursement funds by the state of New York for the replacement of heating systems and elevators in NYCHA. That particular is part of the agreement that the state had with NYCHA. The monitor had to approve that particular plan. That's a very ambitious plan. There's timelines within which all these projects have to be scheduled out. What's going on right now is an RFP is being put out, which is part of the process to select contractors to do those projects. So we're really working hand in hand with NYCHA during that whole process. Other topics that were covered in the quarterly report were drones. So starting last May, and I was actually one of the people on the monitor team that attended a demonstration of drone technology. And the whole point of this is, I don't have to tell all of you here that one of the hallmarks of NYCHA, and it isn't only, of course, NYCHA buildings, but especially at NYCHA, all the sidewalk, bridges, and scaffolding that surround all the buildings. And the whole point of drone technology is that it offers the potential of a technology that's faster and less expensive as a way to really get engineering reports, architectural reports of building envelopes, so that repair and maintenance work can be done much faster with a lot more information. So at the very end of the third quarterly report, there's a section on drones. And one of the things that I would really encourage you to do is there's a link to a video that we created that, I think it's 7 minutes or 5 minutes, that takes people through the process of what a drone can actually do in surveying a building. So I would encourage everyone to look at that, and it'll certainly give you a very good sense of what the potential for drone technology is. The other thing that we've been working on, and quite frankly, it's been a little frustrating, and not only for us, but also for NYCHA, is that on August 1st, there were a few very specific deadlines with regard to waste management and pest control at the developments. It wasn't met by NYCHA, and as we got more involved in this, it became really clear that one of the problems was that there was no real central structure within NYCHA to really manage waste management and pest control, which of course are very much related. So one of the things that NYCHA is in the process of standing up is a waste management department, which will really combine these two efforts and will work with each of the developments to create a waste management plan for every development. Again, I don't have to tell you that developments are different. They have different sizes. They have different infrastructure, and so it's really critical that each development have its own plan. And of course, like everything, but I think particularly with waste management and pests, it's critical that the residents be not only involved, but really be a part of the plan. And so one of the things that NYCHA's been doing, and we've been doing it with them, is a pilot program at 2 of the developments. And they've actually started a structure, and NYCHA was really good at figuring out a way to actually provide stipends to some of the residents, to really be teachers to other residents in terms of best practices in waste management and pest control, which has been really successful. So obviously, given that there are 300 plus developments, this is a pretty ambitious project in terms of creating these plans. But I think, and obviously NYCHA thinks with the creation of this waste management department that that's really going to be a way to have that become a reality. The other thing that's been happening is NYCHA and the monitor team has been involved in meetings with regard to restructuring, really recreating NYCHA's organizational plan. in the middle of December, a consultant that was hired by NYCHA completed and it came out with a very long report. There's actually an 18-page summary, which I would encourage people to read, that really summarizes kind of the current snapshot of NYCHA in terms of their current organization and operational structure. And so working on that platform, the monitor and NYCHA is working on a new organizational plan, and I think the first part of that will likely be out later this particular year. So that's obviously a pretty interesting and important undertaking that's going on. And then the other thing, I know when we usually mention mold remediation and abatement, you know, that's usually a downer in terms of what's happening in NYCHA. And I'm not saying that it's fixed, but there have been some major improvements in that particular realm. NYCHA came up with a plan called Mold Busters, which, and I think they've been, and Eva could tell us more, but I think they've been in operation now for several months, and one of the results of that is that the return of mold in apartments where Mold Busters has been involved and the remediation has been much, much less. So that's obviously a good sign. And so we're working with them. I actually think that the mold action plan that the monitor required will very likely be approved by the end of this month. I know they had a very good conversation today and hopefully going over last edits to that particular plan. And like the heat plan and the elevator plan, it'll be very specific in terms of what has to be accomplished, when it has to be accomplished by, and what are the means by which NYCHA is actually going to get it done. So those are really some of the major good accomplishments that have happened. One of the frustrating things continues to be the lead paint remediation and abatement. That's been very frustrating. And so one of the things, particularly a problem, is sort of the timely repair of lead paint deficiencies in apartments and obtaining what are known as clearances in apartments where work was done that disturb paint. And it's not always known whether the paint, especially if it went deep, contains lead paint, which could be several layers underneath. One of the things that we've been working with NYCHA and trying to do is to speed up the time period from when the work is done and they do something called a dust wipe. A special cloth is used to pick up particles of paint and other things in the apartment, and then of course the question is, well, did it contain lead paint or not? And so at this particular point, I think the average is about 2 days, sometimes 3 days to get the results back. Obviously that doesn't really work. One of the things that we've suggested to both NYCHA and to the city is the possibility of the city financing a laboratory, which is obviously right here in New York, so that those results can be obtained much more quickly. Obviously, this isn't just a NYCHA issue. You know, I'm sure you've all read with regard to the schools, lead paint is a problem in other parts. So the thinking is that since so many people, and it's obviously a big issue for the city in general, that wouldn't it make sense, you know, if possible, to actually finance a laboratory right here in New York, or at least in the metropolitan area, so that those results can be done, can be obtained much more quickly. So those are kind of the major accomplishments. As I said, it's contained in the third quarterly report, which is on the monitor's website. And I should also mention that the elevator and heat action plans that were approved are also on the monitor's website.
Thank you, Dan.
The only thing I'd really add, with a couple of things I'd add, is that when it comes to the lead, there's been a focus by NYCHA on apartments with children under 6. That's been a big focus of theirs, and that's really the most vulnerable population. So that's where the focus should be.
Now I'd like to turn it over to HUD Regional Administrator Lynn Patton, please.
Thank you, Asha, and thank you, Dan, for that great summary. And in fact, I'm going to pretty much do something similar. You touched on the fact that January 31st was the one-year anniversary. HUD headquarters has put together a pretty comprehensive outline of accomplishments during that time. And what I'm going to do is, it's very dense, so I'm going to read, maybe some of the more prominent parts of it, and then I'll find out if I can share this with the group, and certainly find out if I could share it with you guys. So, to begin, 1 year ago, the federal government brokered a monumental agreement between New York City, NYCHA, and the Southern District of New York under Secretary Carson that establishes specific requirements and milestones to address the serious health and safety hazards at NYCHA properties and remedied the deficient conditions at NYCHA in compliance with federal law. This includes, but is not limited to, lead-based paint, mold, heat, vermin, elevators, etc. In the span of a single year, NYCHA has begun restructuring in concert with the monitor and HUD as well. Its management team restored key operational capacities and is on a path to redirect itself to quality public housing for the people of New York City. As part of this agreement, the city committed $2.2 billion in funding over the next 10 years to address these issues. HUD obviously gives almost $3 billion annually to NYCHA. $1 billion of that is in the form of Section 8 vouchers, but over $1.5 billion of that is in the form of capital funding for direct and immediate repairs. As a result of the agreement, NYCHA has established a compliance department. NYCHA has established an environmental health and safety department, and NYCHA has established a quality assurance department. I will skip ahead to some of the other issues, but among the many accomplishments achieved through the joint efforts of SDNY, HUD, and NYCHA are obviously a new federal monitor, Bart Schwartz, and his firm Guidepost were installed. A new chair and CEO of NYCHA, Greg Russ, was appointed. His new leadership team has also been hired and is falling into place. Let me see here. To abbreviate, NYCHA, well, the monitor has approved, as Dan touched on, action plans for heat, elevators, physical inspection process, and the grant distribution agreement, our disbursement agreement, which is the state funds, the GDA of $450 million that we were talking about for specific capital repairs, including elevators and boilers. And concurrently, NYCHA has charted a course for the redevelopment of 62,000 apartments using various repositioning programs, particularly RAD, and more than 3,000 apartments in Brooklyn and the Bronx have or will be done in the near future, with more to sign on ahead. NYCHA has continued to use more than $2 billion of federal funding from Superstorm Sandy to strengthen its properties, replace boilers, emergency generators, protect low-lying areas from future storm damage. One of my friends actually got an alert on their time hop. I guess almost a year ago today, I was moving into Patterson houses to help bring attention to the crisis that is NYCHA. That stay generated over 759 unique media hits per week, which I think helped elevate this issue to a level that hadn't been seen before. One of the things I'm also proud of is that it resulted in a direct meeting on February 22nd with the President of the United States about the crisis of NYCHA, which hadn't been done before by any sitting president in history. And he's very concerned about the status of this monitor and development and reform. He remembers obviously a time when NYCHA was not like this, having grown up in Queens, and we are proud to give NYCHA in excess of $30 million a week towards this repair. And let me see here. I think it goes into a lot of funding, and I will leave it at that. But, we are on the right path. I think that we have an amazing working relationship Sherrod, I know you're listening. You're doing an amazing job working with the monitors team and NYCHA's team on a daily basis to help really bring this plan to fruition, and the secretary thanks you for that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you for your continued support and partnership with the monitor. Do you want to weigh in, Bart?
Yep, I just want to say thank you, too. It's much appreciated. It's been a very strong and positive team effort. Thank you.
Thank you. Agreed.
And with that, I do want to turn it over to Sherrod, who's on the phone. Can you please open his line?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Hey, good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
So I have a couple of updates. One, per Bart's request, we are working on the bylaws for the resident councils. We're starting with the CCOP. We started last month. It was I think it was a 2.5 hour, maybe 3 hour meeting. Very intense at times, a lot of skepticism, but I do believe that the bylaws will be complete hopefully next month. We got a meeting on the 20th coming up to go through the second part of the bylaws, but it shows that there are a lot of historical barriers that must be overcome before a lot of the institutional change within the councils themselves can take hold. So hopefully, when we finish these bylaws with the CCOP, we can take a slimmer version of those bylaws and present them to the resident councils. Hopefully, Eva can get me inside of the cluster meetings, and we can start presenting them there so that the resident councils can look at them, comment on them, and hopefully decide on their own if they want to update their bylaws to that model. The second update is dealing with the NYCHA MOU. I got an update from the chair himself, along with the executive vice president and director of resident engagements, on the MOU process that they're going through with the CCOP. It has been a collaborative effort, tense at times, but still collaborative. I believe they have a couple of more sets of meetings coming up before they present it for review. And at that time, we're going to review the MOU and make sure that it is something that both parties can work out, and more importantly, can be used for the regular resident councils. So those are the two main updates that I have, but there's still a lot of work to do. I got a fantastic email from the president of the Fred Samuel Resident Council that has some really good questions and a pretty substantial concern. And I was happy to work with the monitor to be able to respond to that president, but it still highlights the work that we need to do on the resident engagement side so that the resident presidents, as well as the resident councils in general, have a streamlined and very detailed relationship with NYCHA. So more work to be done, but I am glad that we are seeing progress toward the two main documents, which are the bylaws and the MOU. And that's all I got.
Sherrod, thank you for that update. Before we let you go, does anyone around the room have any questions? I see Mr. Hall with his card raised.
I want to make this short, but I want to thank you, Mr. Sherrod, especially as it lends itself to the MOU. I think that was very important, although I do not know all the intricate factors because I'm just the TA president. So I'm waiting for you to finish with CCOP so that we can get this thing going in the best interest of all the developments. All right, I have a quadri of questions for you, but I need for you to finish up so everything is finalized. And I know you're in the middle of litigation, so it's difficult for me to ask the questions I want to ask because it's not finalized. So I will wait. I will contact you upon completion of the dialogue that you're having with CCOP, and hopefully this will go in the right direction. Okay, so I thank you.
If you could send me those questions anyway, so shoot me an email, because they may actually have us make a different deviation without having to start the process over. So if you can you can either send me an email or send me an email setting up a meeting where we can talk so that I can hear what you got to say and we can make sure that your voice is heard, especially if it may cause something that we didn't think about. We never know. So just shoot me an email.
Okay, you got it. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you, Sherrod. And thank you also for your continued work and collaboration. I know that you are working really hard on behalf of HUD, and we appreciate you. Excellent. Now we're going to turn to Councilwoman Alika Humphrey Samuel, please, who's going to update us on elected official funding issues.
Well, good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
I just want to first state that this is budget season for the city council and, well, the city of New York. And so what that means is we are literally negotiating the budget. And a lot of the resident association presidents around the table know that this is that time, that opportunity to ask your elected officials for funding, right? And when we talk about capital funds, each elected official, city council members, receive about maybe $5 million, plus or minus, for capital projects throughout the entire district. So when you see elected officials allocate $500,000, $1 million for a project in NYCHA, that's a considerable chunk of their funds. And I just wanted to put that out there because I know that in October, we discussed the importance of following and tracking the funding that is allocated to NYCHA from elected officials, but I had to say that right now to put it into context because I don't necessarily see an urgency in our city government being helpful with trying to track the funding that's allocated from elected officials at this time. Since the last meeting, well, since October, I presented everyone with a list of just the city dollars, and it totaled $125 million of funds that were allocated to NYCHA from city council members only. $125 million. That's nothing to sneeze at. Because when we're talking, I hear a lot about the $100 million from the state, and I hear about the $450 million. But $125 million from your city council members that have a large constituency, that's a huge chunk of funding. And so at this time, we were able to track down not even 25% of the funding that has been allocated. And that does not mean that the projects are not moving along. It's just a matter of what's happening with each one and being able to articulate that, one, to the residents, but also to the elected officials that allocated the funding. And so today we had stated, and as a body, as a council body, we voted and passed a new law that requires the tracking of all New York City capital projects. And so that's something that we were able to do across the entire city, across all agencies. And so NYCHA will, of course, be included in that. But what does that actually mean, right? Because we know that there's an issue with being able to track funding, period, in New York City. And so we're implementing a task force within the council with representatives from the council, the mayor's office, and also we are requesting that this online tracking, that the tracking system is online for the public to see, but you can only put online what you gather, right? And so that brings me back to the need to be able, and in all fairness, this is something that NYCHA is trying to pull together, but that's a problem within itself, because I'm expecting to just be able to get a printout of what the projects are, where they are, and where they are in the timeline, in the process, and not even talking about the state. So clearly, we're not talking about the state. And so my update is we have 25% of an update from the projects that we presented in October, and that 25% of an update came from the elected officials and the resident association presidents and leaders who know about the projects in their district, not from NYCHA. And so what we are implementing in the city, we can do that, but again, how does that have a direct impact on what we need from NYCHA?
Excellent. Well, thank you for that update, because that's music to our ears to hear that there's a new law and a task force really looking into this issue. And when you say $125 million, I know if I give somebody $100, I want to know where it's going, right? So 125 million, we have to be able to track that. And I hear so many frustrated residents that say, my council person gave me $500,000 for something amazing, and we still don't see it come to fruition, and, so many years go by, so this is such an important issue, and thank you for staying on it. Comments, questions, Mr. Hall?
And I'm very glad you brought this up. My councilman, Andy King, has done wonders in Gun Hill. We're not finished. We're partially there. We still need the complete fencing, and this transparency, which is really what you're provoking, is totally necessary in order for NYCHA to express where the dollars go. All right? I've tried to the best of my know-how to try to keep up with my capital project as far as Gun Hill was concerned. And I see now more than ever before how difficult it could be. So I really hope that we can have some type of transparency a lot better between the creation of this task force and the new individuals in NYCHA, all right, to uphold and, re-strategize the capital project funding plan. Hopefully things are going the right direction, but it's urgently necessary.
And I will say that my colleagues, this was Brad Lander's bill, and it clearly Vanessa Gibson, who chairs the Capital
Great.
Projects Committee, is really on top of it, and she's also part of the Public Housing Committee, and so she's been at the table and pushing to make sure that there's a process in place, because NYCHA can be unique in so many different ways.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Patton?
Yes, I just wanted to piggyback on what Councilwoman Alika Ampersand was saying, and thank you for trying to pin this down, because I know that in my travels over the last couple of years, going to all these NYCHA properties with various elected officials, I can't tell you how many times I've heard from, even borough presidents that they've given $300,000 to Sotomayor for computers that have yet to be purchased. This was about, 5 years ago. And then, or $1 million to the Patterson Community Center, which has yet to be renovated. And like you said, this is a lot of money. It's nothing to shake a stick at. We had inquired about this, and again, in Eva's defense, it was different leadership back then. But, we had been told that that for some reason, and again, I think this is something that we can shake out, but the NYCHA leadership at the time was under the impression that certain funds from council folk fell under, were these discretionary funds, is that what it's called?
It's capital.
This is all capital.
And whether or not it could be used for these types of projects. There was some sort of disconnect between city rules and the funding, and what the funding was supposed to be originally designated for, and that they were in some sort of limbo and were trying to get through the red tape so that it could be applied for these specific types of projects. Like, for example, this could not be used to buy computers per se, but could be used to do capital repairs. It seemed like a lot of double talk to me at the time. But I'm not going to speak for people who aren't here to speak for themselves, but I think it was my understanding that how the funding was classified made a big difference. And whether it's a capital budget item, revenue budget item, things like this.
So what happens so there are two different pockets of funding. So I will allocate $50,000 to my resident associations in total for discretionary expense. But last year I allocated $4 million in capital. And so it is different. And what happens with the elected officials, if there's a need to renovate a playground, because of all of the issues within NYCHA, they have to prioritize their funding. We're talking about elevators and boilers and mold and lead and everything else. So a playground is way down on the list. And so an elected official will say, you know what, well, I'll utilize my capital funds to do a playground, which will cost $800,000.
Got it. And one of the things that I know they were saying is that, you know, hold on one second, that, you know, that is what has prevented NYCHA from being able to use some of the money in the cases. Sorry, I'm communicating with my team because I couldn't remember the name of the funds. But my whole thing was, NYCHA needs to communicate that to the elected official. You know, in the meantime, they're sitting there wondering if this is going to be built, when are the computers going to be purchased, and there was no level of communication, a response back from the agency itself. If you know that this needs to be sorted out in terms of how the funding is classified, then at least let folks know that, whether it's true or not. And so, to me, the lack of communication was also a huge problem.
So another solution, you know, we can, like I said, we'll have the task force in place citywide for all agencies, but I think is critical to be able to have a project manager who is sitting in NYCHA to be able to look to see and keep track of these particular projects, because there's enough funding in order to make sure that this is moving along.
Yeah, I was just going to say something similar to that. Where I think we can be helpful is making sure that the protocols and the procedures are in place in NYCHA. Because I remember when we first looked into this, sometimes we would hear from NYCHA that the elected officials didn't fill out the right forms or describe it the right way.
Right, that's
Whether
what I mean.
whether that was accurate or not, I don't know. But if we have the protocols and procedures in place, then we'll know that everybody's
Right.
doing it the right way. That's where we can be helpful from the monitor's role.
And again, they weren't telling this to the elected officials.
That's right.
Whether that was true or not, you know, at least say, hey, this form, can you redo it?
Right.
It didn't make any sense.
We don't
Ms.
fill out
Ortiz?
forms.
Ms.
Thank
Ortiz?
My turn? No, it's Miss. Oh,
Did you
oh,
wanna-
my question. I'm sorry, I'm just like so listening to everything. So in reference to what Councilmember Samuels just said, I have put in for discretionary funding, which I get within the 12-month period of time. So they usually release the discretionary funding to the resident leaders between July 1st and June 30th. And we are allowed to do as we choose with that money as long as we present the receipts accordingly. However, in certain cases, I can request discretionary funding, for example, to fix the lobby areas, like the floors and things like that, which is beautification in a smaller scale, which we've done at Valatic Houses. In addition, I request every single year funding, but you can also request from the borough president as well. Right now, I've got 3 parks getting completely redone because I beg and I cry. But a lot of resident leaders are unaware that they can do this. A lot of resident leaders don't know. They think that when they hear the council member gave funding, they automatically think that they're automatically going to get funding allocated to them without them putting in for it. And there is a form, and you put in the things that you want in order of priority. And then based on your council person, that's the funding that they allocate to you. So I think that one of the things that resident engagement can kind of up their ante on a little bit on this is teaching or explaining to the resident leaderships during their workshops that they can ask for funding from their borough president if it needs to combine with city council funding for a larger scale project. Thank you.
That's a good point. Councilwoman?
Just one last point. The reason why I wanted to just mention that figure, the 125 million, is because I do understand that NYCHA is under a lot of pressure, and there are so many projects that are happening across the board, and I get them billions of dollars worth of projects. And so because this is funding that the elected officials spoke directly to the resident about,
Right.
this is such a low-hanging fruit to me, because when we talk about building trust and hope and, you know, just that particular bond, this is something where the elected official would like to do something, because we can't pay for a boiler,
Right.
but we can fix a park. And so just to be able to look at, you know, that particular opportunity to really get this right is why I'm just, you know, stressing
And
it.
what was so frustrating is it's also such an easy win for NYCHA. Like, they couldn't get out of their own way. I mean, somebody's handing you this money and go buy some computers. To me, that was something that would have made a great headline in the middle of a really bad winter, for example. And so it was almost like we were begging an agency of past to help themselves, help us help you. And that was frustrating.
Nope.
Okay, thank you so much for that important issue. Darrell?
I'm sorry, I tried to get the card up. Councilmember, just one question. Out of the 28 million odd that you are tracking, is that list available somewhere? Has that been placed on the website yet, or can you?
No, there is no website. This was just us pulling from the city council a list of all of the capital projects that we allocated to, and then gave it to NYCHA to ask, you know, what's the update on all of these different
Got it.
developments.
And the 25% that we were able to track down, can you share that list of like?
Oh,
what-
yeah, sure.
Okay.
I can share the full list if you want to.
I have the full list from that,
Providing
too.
us
Trust me, I was going in detail in that meeting, every
Oh,
line
okay.
of the list. What would you were able to track down?
But we can put that on our website, if that's what you're asking, sure.
That'd be great.
Even better.
Is there anything that we could help do to facilitate getting the information on the other 75%?
If everyone at this table, it got to the point where my staff was literally just calling every single person they can think of to get the information. Because, you know, I'm under the impression that NYCHA is just, you know, overwhelmed, just have a lot going on and can't provide us with the data.
Well, I wonder if we integrated some of the information we had, because we sent investigators out on some of these, so we'll make sure that if it wasn't integrated into that list, that it gets in there.
That's a good point. Thank you. Okay, next, we'd actually like to turn it over to Eva Trimble, who's the Executive Vice President for Strategy and Innovation in the Office of the Chair, to give an update, please.
Thank you so much. I wanted to start by thanking both Bart and Lynn for recognizing the progress that's been made over the last year. It has not always been easy, but I think the partnership has really grown, especially since the start of the chair. The new chair has been on board, and since I've been here, I've seen some really, as you said, Lynn, the path forward is now clear. We still have a lot more to that path ahead of us, but I think we're on the right track. I wanted to, I'm going to start just by responding a little bit to the Capitol, since we were just talking about it. I'd like, if it's okay, Councilwoman, to volunteer for that task force, because actually, this is something that's very near and dear to my heart.
Get rid.
Actually, one of my very first jobs in working for the city almost 20 years ago was working for a borough president and managing the allocation of reso funds to local organizations, and that's what these capital funds are. So I care very deeply about that process and ensuring that the elected officials' funding is going to where it was intended to. That was how I started at the city. So I'd like to try to fix that at NYCHA. I know you shared the list during October, and lots of other things have gotten in the way, but I want to commit to getting back on track with that and helping to coordinate the capital process. I'm involved in the GDA conversations, so I think it's a natural fit that I can help out with. So please definitely include me on that task force. And so going back to some of the transformation and organizational plan work that was referenced earlier, I wanted to share an update that we are in kind of starting that transformation work. The new organizational plan is due to the monitor and the Southern District by the middle of June. And so right now, we've kicked off what we're calling our engagement phase. And so we want this plan to be inclusive of all of our stakeholders, but most importantly, the residents. So if the plan doesn't work for the residents, it's not going to work. So starting tomorrow morning, actually, we are having a resident association presidents meeting at Johnson Houses. And we are going to spend the morning with the resident associations. And part of it is going to be listening and hearing from you all about what do you want to see in this plan? What do you want to see in the future, NYCHA, and what should we look like? So we're very excited for that conversation tomorrow morning. It will also include, Mr. Hall, to your reference earlier, an update on the MOU conversations directly from the chair. And so you'll get to hear a little bit more about what has been going on in the CCOP conversation. So hopefully maybe some of your questions will be answered tomorrow morning as well. So we're probably going to be spending, all of February and a good part of March on a listening tour where we've set up meetings with advocates. We've reached out to key elected officials, including your office, to start talking about what should be in this plan and what it should look like. And so we'll be looking for probably the next 6 weeks or so to collect data, to collect information, to make sure we're getting the plan right. And then we will start pulling that all together. And then we will come back to all of the stakeholders with a second round of meetings to say, did we hear you right? Are we on the right track? Is this what you wanted to see? And so that's the plan to get us through June when we present a draft to the monitor and the Southern District. I wanted to focus on two key parts of the plan because I understand their concerns for this committee. The first is alternative work schedules, or AWS. We have heard loud and clear that this is not working properly. We understand that, while it's a key part of that is that we just don't have the frontline staffing needed to cover all of those shifts, but we think there has to be a way to have something work where we can provide residents services outside of 8 to 4 and still make this work with the staffing we have. And so tomorrow there will be a release of a RFP. It's going out tomorrow to request for an evaluation firm to come in and work with us to evaluate the program. We understand that there are a couple of places where it's working. What are the practices that's making it work there? Is it something that's replicable anywhere else? Or what is it that's needed to make this work? Is it just a matter of more staffing? And then we have to return to our funders and others to see how we get that to happen? Or is there something else that we can do to structure the staffing in a way to provide the services we want with the staffing we have? So that we're hoping we'll get some good respondents to that RFP, and we can have a firm on board in the next few weeks in order to start that process. The goal is to have recommendations for fixing AWS included in our transformation plan that's due in June. So that's one piece, and we've already started some conversations with some of you, and if there's other people we should talk to, please let us know, because we will be doing a lot of field research as part of that plan. The second project that is a key part of this plan is in regards to annual recertifications and annual reviews, which I know you'll be speaking about, Ms. Ortiz. We've heard also loud and clear that the annual review process conducted by housing assistants and the new Siebel system is also not working as well as it should. So we've already engaged with the Service Design Studio, which is actually part of the Mayor's Office of Economic Opportunity. And the Service Design Studio works with city agencies to help rethink how services delivered to the public. And so in this case, they've engaged with us to basically create what we call journey maps for both the housing assistance, from the housing assistance perspective, as well as from the residents' perspective, so that we're seeing what are the steps in the process? How is it working? What else is on the housing assistance plate that maybe is preventing the process from working the way it should? What is it in the system, in the Siebel system, that maybe needs to be changed to make it work better? We understand that when we went from paper to Siebel, we changed some of the way the questions were asked. And so someone who had been filling out the same form the same way every year was now all of a sudden presented with a very different process. And that's very confusing for most of our residents. So they're going to be looking at both the form and the function. And that also is due to be complete so that we can have recommendations in place as part of our transformation plan. So we're going to be reaching out to all of you for more input. We'll be having, I think, a very engaging conversation tomorrow morning, I hope. But if there's something specifically that you think we should be looking at more closely or that we should be taking into account as part of this transformation, please just reach out to me directly and we can get it included in our studies.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that update. You've hit upon so many things, and it's so exciting to hear about the progress that you're making at NYCHA now, and that, as you said, that we're on a path forward because there's so much to be done. But I'm really most excited to hear that residents' voices and concerns are being heard and listened to and folded into this process of transformation, because it's critical that we really cater to the critical audience, which is the residents who have to live in NYCHA. So I'm happy to hear that as part of your update. And I'm excited about this meeting tomorrow and the meetings that will come that are directly engaging the residents. So that's important. Thank you for that. And then let us know, too, how we can help facilitate any of the discussions with residents, too. We're out in the field talking to residents as well, and we're hearing a lot of the same things that you just touched upon, namely that, AWS is not working, so we're glad to hear that you know that, and are working on a plan forward to fix that system. And other ways, for example, you touched upon the recertification process, and I know that Ms. Ortiz is going to touch on that in a moment as well, but one of the big things I'm hearing is, and perhaps it's part of the function portion that you talked about, but even when people do their form and submit it, there's still some kind of disconnect that it's not registering that they've submitted their form. So I'm hoping that all of that will be addressed in the function aspect that you just touched upon as well. So that's great, and I'm sure there's some questions around the room. I see Mr. Hall ready to weigh in. Go ahead, please.
Ms. Trimble, I just want to publicly thank you because I've been throwing all kind of assignments at you because the world just continues going round and round, and presidents have problems, and I've been able to depend on you to help solve our regular category of problems, along with the fact that we're reassessing these situations. And in each one of these circumstances, the key word here is transparency. So I'm very happy that we're going to have this meeting tomorrow so the presidents you can get the feedback directly from the people who are in charge. Okay? And I'll let Ms. Ortiz do the lease thing because I know she's got the right idea. Okay? Thank you.
Before that, I just want to applaud Ms. Trimble and the chair and the new hierarchy of NYCHA for including the voices of the resident leadership, which has been silenced for many, many years. I applaud you for including us. I applaud you for listening, and I applaud you for taking the initiative to include our thoughts and our convictions on how NYCHA has been running, what works and what has not worked in this new plan. So thank you.
You're welcome. And tomorrow's meeting will be just the first of that conversation.
Very good.
We're already worried that we're not going to have enough time tomorrow morning to get through everything, that we know it's going to be a big morning.
That's great. I'm actually going to go out of order since we're just talking about the recertification process and call on you, Ms. Ortiz.
Siebel. First, let me say that when Siebel first came out, I was very vocal that it should have launched solely in Staten Island so that they can get the glitches and tweak it and fix it and play with it until they got it right and then launch it borough by borough. But nobody listened to me. So, the human factor in Siebel is what's missing. What's happening is the residents, yes, they are putting in their annuals, and the housing assistants are checking it, and then it sits in a queue until the assistant manager or the manager sees it. But if the housing assistants are not reminding the assistant manager or the manager that this is finished, it's going to sit there. And while it is sitting there, the computer is sending a message, it's not done, it's not done, it's not done, now generating letters to residents saying that they did not get their annual review, they failed to submit, and then the letters that they have to show up in court start to happen. So that disconnect is a very, very, very big factor. Then you have the second factor is if you don't have a manager or you don't have an assistant manager, everything sits there. It is not the residents' fault. It is not the housing assistants' fault because they don't have the authority to push that annual ahead. only the assistant manager or the manager. So if you have one that's been out for 2 months and one that's maybe on jury duty for 2 months, you've got 2 months of backlog. So that becomes another issue. Another one is the system just spits out letters. It's not recognizing, so let's say Mr. Hall's income ceased in January, but his income still has to be reported because he worked those 6 months of the year. The system is not recognizing that Mr. Hall is no longer working. So they're calculating his 6 months as a year and therefore raising the rent as opposed to decreasing it. So now when the resident goes to speak on this issue, now they're 60 days, sometimes 90 days before the correction is made. And in the interim, the resident is now facing a hardship. Another issue with the system is that it's automatically checking off air conditioner, freezer, where residents who don't have either one of the two or even a washing machine, now their rent is going up by the surcharges, and then when they go to get the surcharge removed, now they have to wait for somebody to come and visit the apartment and whatever. I have one resident that's been 3 years.
What do you mean it's automatically checking off?
For some reason or another, some of the residents are getting their rent, when they get their new rent, it's showing, a lot of them don't even read the lease. They just look at the amount and don't pay attention. And then at some point, they'll, well, why is my rent so high? Why did it go up so high? My income has been the same. And then when they look, they'll see they're being charged for an air conditioner fee, they're being charged for a washing machine fee, they're being charged for a freezer when they don't have that. And what's happening is a lot of residents don't understand, so when it says freezer, they think it's the refrigerator, so they'll check it off. So again, it's a lot of these things that, and they're very repetitive. Another thing is it's lags, the constant buffering and the lagging. Because the information that's put there is so repetitive that it's filling up the system. So for example, if everyone knows the Social Security office is on 12th Street, for example, down in Lower Manhattan. So you put in they ask you for the address where you get your income from, so you put that in. It doesn't recognize it. So now you automatically put it in again. It doesn't recognize it. So I figured this out. I just put the zip code in, and it only picks up the zip code. It doesn't give you the full address. It just picks up the zip code. So again, if you have something like 1199, Social Security, public assistance, these are standards. So when you put in the name, the addresses should just pop up based on the borough, and then you click and it should fill it in. It does not do that. Just like when you want to remove someone from the lease, it doesn't do that either. So it has a lot of glitches, and again, it's not. It should have been made to communicate with the AS400, which is the old system. The new system is not communicating because the new system was created based on Section 8 application and not NYCHA application and recertifications, and they're both very different. So if you're not able to communicate and you can't pull the information from here to here, you're going to lose a lot. And once you lose the AS400, you're losing not only the tenant's history, but you're losing the history to the apartment. And you don't want to do that. I just think everybody needs to have physical training on these, and not everybody at the same time. Because again, another challenge that we have that causes the backlog is you have 3 housing assistants. One is in court, one is on jury duty, the secretary's out, so now that housing assistant that's left behind is now a secretary, okay? So again, it's also staff shortage. A lot of the developments are seriously short of staff. And there are no backfills. It's like someone leaves and they never get replaced. And especially in large developments, you really need that support system, and you're just not having it. Again, I think I've hit on everything.
You did, thank you so much. And it's such a frustration for so many residents. Eva, did you want to weigh in a little bit more on that?
No, I appreciate the helpful examples, and I've already forwarded Ms. Ortiz's contact information to the project team so that they can hear directly from her as well.
Excellent.
One of the things that I heard, and I think contributes to the problem, particularly with seniors, is that the place to go to deliver the paper is too far for them to walk. They just can't get to it.
It was consolidation. Yeah.
Right. So it's, see, you really have to consider those things, whether they can have satellite offices or another way to do it.
Can I echo quickly?
Please.
So one of the issues is that those that get the hard copy, they have to mail it back to Long Island City. Long Island City is not putting it into the system. Long Island City is sending it back to the development. When the development receives it, they're thinking that Long Island City inputted it, and it just goes into the tenant's folder. Now the tenant is getting penalized because they're saying they didn't fill out their annual review. So that, to me, it's a repetitive system where if you're getting it, why can't the resident just bring it straight to the management office? I just think it's repetitive.
Mr. Hall?
I just wanted to say, I think most residents become lethargic. And that's because when you get an apartment in NYCHA, and I want you to know, the waiting list is 181,000. So when you get an apartment in NYCHA, all you get is this little booklet, A Home to Be Proud Of, which is a joke. And maybe that's where you need to redefine the urgency as it lends itself to how to read your rent slip. And that would greatly help people not to be lethargic because they're missing the key points in order to fall into this trap. And they don't realize what's what. And when you're new and you're so happy because of this outrageous list and you've conquered everything, because I see the housing assistants, they say, well, this apartment is not done, but all we need to do is this, give me the key. And they take the apartment with the thought that eventually some of the things that are missing will be fortified. It never gets done. And they don't realize it. That makes them unhappy. But going back to when you're an original, when you first come in, that booklet maybe needs to be redefined with the hopes of educating folks to overcome that lethargic attitude. It's something to think about.
Although you hit on something that I've heard a lot when I'm going to do the visits, that there used to be a kind of a better new resident orientation that seems to be missing these days, so that you know the basic stuff, like this is the rules here with regard to trash collection and, you know, the expectations, et cetera, that isn't getting done anymore when new residents move in. So that's an important thing
Yeah.
that goes beyond the book.
Yeah.
That's also the kind of thing you do with videos these days
Yeah.
and other media, not just a booklet.
Right.
Okay, now I would like to turn to the Office of the Deputy Mayor, Vicky Beans. We have Hallie Stein, who's our representative tonight.
Hi, thank you for inviting me to speak tonight. I know that we don't have much time, but I want to reiterate what has been said already about the collaborative relationships that have developed over the past year and over the past months between the deputy mayor and with Ms. Patton and with the monitors team and with Chair Russ and Eva. It's really been generally a collaborative relationship, and there's open communication, regular meetings, regular lunches. So I think that is really, again, a step, a path forward that is very promising. I'm here today to talk about community centers, which is the challenges faced at community centers are very familiar to most everyone at this table, intimately familiar with. And again, many of the funds that the council member has raised are funds that were committed to community centers. And we have been focused over the past weeks and months on how to fix the issues, the condition issues at the centers that are ongoing about operations and maintenance, and also the significant capital needs. which are really tied hand in hand. And we've been working very closely with DYCD and with Daryl. I think we speak basically every day, including weekends. So we've really tried to delve into this and figure out what are the real key stumbling blocks, and what are the threshold issues. And I think as with many things that have been looked at over the past year, the more you've identified an issue and you look into it, you realize how much more complicated it is than you initially thought. And that's certainly the case with the community centers. I just wanted to give a very brief overview of how we've been thinking about this and the steps that we over at City Hall and city agencies, along with our partners at NYCHA and with the providers, have been taking. The deputy mayor has met regularly with settlement houses. She's visited a number of community centers just to get a better sense of actually how to tackle this issue. And through the work that we've done, we've really focused on the community centers that are city-run, because those are the ones that we have the most involvement with. So there are about 400 community centers that are at NYCHA developments, and community center, I think, is a very loose term. They're basically spaces that have been identified as spaces that can be used by the community. Of those, about 290 or so are operated by city agencies, which is still a very large number. And there are three main categories of programs, and we've tried to start looking at the programs separately because they all have different legal requirements, they have different stakeholders, and they have different needs. So there's the cornerstone programs that DYCD and Daryl run. There's the pre-K and other early childhood programs that DOE now runs. And there are the senior centers and senior programs that DFTA runs. And for example, pre-K and early childhood, they really have to deal with many lead issues that the senior centers don't have to deal with. There are also other DOH regulations. There's a whole variety of things that each one of these types of programs has to deal with that might be very unique to them. And there's also a wide variety of providers. There are some very sophisticated providers like Grand Street Settlement House. JT Falcone's not here today, but actually through the CAC, we've been working very closely together to identify some of the providers that are sophisticated and want to take on more responsibility for their own sites. But then there are also providers that are very small and they don't have many resources or capacity. So we're trying to figure out a flexible approach that would fit both a settlement house that has been around for 100 years or so, and also the much smaller providers. There are also many different types of spaces. There are some that are standalone, that have their own systems, have their own HVAC. There are others that are within building systems, so they have to deal with not only what's happening inside of the envelope, but they're also dealing with what's happening in the rest of the building. And so there's a close relationship between that. So as we've looked more into this, we've realized how many different issues and buckets there are and how many different challenges need to be addressed. So we've tried to kind of identify what those issues are. And right now we are also working with OMB because all of these things cost money. So we are working with OMB right now to try to figure out and price out how much O&M costs per square foot for a community facility, how much installing the necessary fire alarms are, how much just getting a facility up to basic standard DOB and DOH-MH requirements is. So we've been working with OMB on that and also with our agency partners and NYCHA to get real examples of how much money has been spent over the past decade or so on these things and over the past couple of years. And as many of you have experienced, getting this information can be challenging. Getting correct information can also be challenging. So right now we're whatever information we get, we try to verify with outside parties and our partners. And also what we've discovered is that while there are contracts between these providers and city agencies, Many of these providers don't actually have leases, or they have outdated leases with NYCHA. So NYCHA is a landlord that has an occupant that doesn't necessarily have a lease. So that also is another issue that NYCHA, I know, is very much focused on right now, and I know the Chairman Russ is focused, and his team are focused on that as well. So just thinking about the scope of having to enter into a couple hundred new leases, that is quite an undertaking. So we would like to move forward with getting these leases entered into, figuring out how much this ongoing operation and maintenance cost is going to be, figuring out a legal mechanism to get that to the providers, and also determining, based on what the capacity of the provider is and what the status of the different community centers are and the need, how and who should actually be doing that work ongoing. So these are some of the issues that we have come across and discovered as we've been really delving into this. And it's not to say that there's going to be some very easy, quick solution, especially when you're dealing with so many different factors and buildings that are honestly in these types of conditions. But looking forward, we're looking to the summer right now to see, we're in February, so it's now a good time to start really looking at what some of these community centers needs are going to be over the summer, and making sure, at least in the short term, that we're able to get them into as good a shape as we can in order to avoid many of the issues that were encountered last summer with these community centers. So that's, for the short term, that's one of the things that we're starting to do. And for a more long-term solution, I think we've identified the issues, we've been working with our partners, and we're starting to, figure out a path forward. So that is kind of the short of it. I don't know if anyone has any questions or any thoughts or suggestions. That would be really appreciated.
As daunting as that sounds, and it is, one of the real positive things is that you're beginning to sort out who's responsible for what, and that hasn't been done before. So I think that's a big plus.
Yeah.
Councilwoman?
So I appreciate everything that you just said. I promise you I do. But I want to be able to be honest, and I think that this particular committee is an opportunity to be able to learn from past mistakes, or be able to utilize historical knowledge in order to have a better pathway forward. And I say that because 4 years ago, I was part of the task force, the working group with UNH, and we exhausted all of this information. When UNH actually went through each and every community center that they have, that they work out of, and said, this is how much it's going to cost us to do the necessary repairs that we need, and it is not our responsibility. So can we, and there was a conversation around the mayor's office, the administration, even coming up with paying for that dollar amount in order to move forward. So so this has been done before? And so the conversation, so I guess we're trying to figure out, like, not a what happened, but to be able to say, okay, this didn't work before, or we're picking up from here, or we lost the folders, we lost the files, just something, because I don't want to, it's great to be able to say what you said, but will next year I don't want to waste time, is my point. And I know that UNH and even other agencies that are under DFTA provided information with how much it's going to cost them to do what they need to do anyway. So you get my point.
So if I could just respond to that, we've been working very closely with UNH, and they've been providing actually some of the best information that we have on that, based on those. I recognize that these conversations have been going on for many years. I think that this is a unique time, and we have an opportunity here with the new chairperson, with the deputy mayor, and with the monitor. I'm hopeful that maybe those conversations were not for naught. But we are working very closely with UNH to get their information, and also with the agencies. What's happened is that in the 4 years, there's been even more deterioration of the buildings. So there's been more work orders and more needs and exacerbation of a lot of the existing issues. So we're trying to update some of that information, but we are working very closely with UNH and the settlement houses, because they're really the most sophisticated group of providers that we can get information from.
So update sounds better than starting from.
Yes, update.
Back on that word.
Good. Ms. Williams-Moore?
Yes, so I know you're speaking to more of the O&M
Yeah.
side of things, but I just want to venture off on another area. So when we talk about community center leases, are those leases available for residents to view? I don't know if that's a question for you, but also in the renewal process, does the community have a say in whether these leases are being renewed? Sometimes these community centers aren't working in our communities. So that's also an issue that we're facing. Sometimes they're catering to people that don't actually live in the developments that they're housed in, that their leases are with. So I just want to know what type of action or it can be taken so that the residents feel like they are going to be served in a community center that is taking space in their communities.
Yeah, I can answer part of that from the DYCD end. So when we started the Cornerstone program and the contracts, and even when we did the second iteration of the RFP in 2015, 2016, every resident council had the opportunity to assign someone to read the proposals that were coming into that development. Unfortunately, there was a low number of resident councils who actually sent a rep to read. It was less than 10, I believe, out of 94 community centers. And the second part to your question around, I believe it's we have to follow the 51% rule. So we do spot checks, we check in our system to ensure that programs are at least 51% of NYCHA residents. And as you may know, and some folks don't know this, but you may have a development, let's say Johnson, 51% has to be at least from NYCHA residents, not necessarily from Johnson. They can come from King, Clinton, Lehman. That probably doesn't happen in Johnson, but they have to be at least 51%. And when we run the numbers, we're finding 80%, 90% of those residents. There's the Cornerstone Advisory Boards where we suggest that those are the monthly meetings that are happening where there's representation from the resident councils, from the development. There's a few cases where those are happening as a best practice. There are other cases where other meetings are taking over those meetings and they're not running as well, so we're working on that too. But there's definitely opportunity for resident input into this process.
Mr. Hall?
Yeah, I know exactly what you're alluding to, Mr. Rattray. So that being said, and I'm just going to say this, if there is an association that thinks or wants to occupy that center, there's a lot of needs, a lot of qualifications, a lot of specializations. We've been taught, especially in the North Bronx, and you know that, because I'm the home of Keith Ramsey and everybody. If you want to go after that, then you must pursue it to the best of your capability and get everything that's necessary, because that is an opportunity for an association to take over his or her development. And if you're going to, go for it.
And
All right.
just adding to what Ms. Hall was saying, and back in 2000, so we opened up the centers back in 2009, February 2009, for satellite programming until we got the Cornerstone RFP out in that release in, I want to say August, but programs started officially in 2010. During that time period, there were quite a few resident councils that came to us and said, suppose we want to operate. So we did a series of trainings and workshops. One of the requirements, of course, you have to be a nonprofit. And I don't think there were 0 resident councils that applied for that RFP process during that time. Like the one that was close was I'm not going to say names over it, I know it's live stream, but a gentleman from the Ingersoll neighborhood who had a nonprofit at the time, who was the TA president, he failed to apply. Since then, there's been some discussions around it. It comes up in community meetings when I'm there, but we haven't, on the last RFP iteration, we didn't have a resident council that created a nonprofit that did apply.
Right.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you. And one of the things you touched upon at the beginning, Ms. Stein, that makes us really know that this process is worthwhile is the collaboration that's come from all of the different agencies around the table on this important issue. So thank you for your leadership in that and for everybody's participation. I know Daryl, you've been really involved. I know DIFTA's been involved, JT. So thank you. And let us know too how we can continue to help facilitate those conversations. Lastly, for formal presentations, I want to turn to FDNY, please.
Yeah, thank you. I'll keep it brief, actually, because I know we're short on time. 2019, we did see a decrease in fire deaths in comparison to 2018, where we had a high of 88 within the last decade. We dropped 25% to 66 fire deaths, so it's much credit to the preventive outreach that our fire safety teams and our community outreach teams does on behalf of the department, along with our first responders. How that relates to NYCHA and outreach to NYCHA developments, it's really refocusing and thinking of new strategies of how to engage. In the past, we have worked with resident associations, also partnering with DYCD with Cornerstone programs of developing innovative ways, not only to reach tenants, but youth within the different developments and targeting high-need developments based on fire incidents and emergencies. So, even though that was a great working relationship, we wanted to see exactly what more we could do. We've been in conversation with the monitors team, looking at data again, coming from the monitors report, looking at the heat action plan. We are right now looking, with the winter months winding down, to target the top 20 developments that have had heating outages to basically infuse or enhance fire safety outreach in working in partnership with resident associations. Within the coming weeks, we already have close to 5 to 6 developments that we're looking to start off these presentations, but again, with the hopes, at least for this current winter season, to wrap up the top 20. The department is undergoing right now a new method of evaluating and implementing fire safety outreach by embarking through data and analytics on community risk reduction planning, ultimately engaging communities across the 59 community districts or community boards with a focus on targeting vulnerable populations based off fire incidents and high fire rates, not only casualties, but in terms of the severity of fires. And we're going to be making a heavy focus on NYCHA developments and establishing our rankings ultimately based off incidents and fires to basically outreach and look to explore better partnerships throughout the year and in the coming years of working directly with resident associations to establish a more fine-tuned approach to fire safety outreach. One idea that we are looking to develop a proposal within the coming months is developing somewhat to the CERT model in terms of training resident leaders to serve as fire safety ambassadors, where we could activate periodically and seasonally to serve as messengers to carry fire safety messaging and fire safety trainings within their resident associations. So to think about not only utilizing our firefighters to spread the fire safety message, but also taking a home-based approach of really empowering resident leaders to bring this to their communities and their developments. So that's ultimately in the works, but like I said, with the monitors team, we are going to be targeting the top 20 developments that have suffered from heating outages based off the heat action plan that was released by the monitor.
Yeah, you might not normally associate mold with fire prevention issues, but as you know, vents are being cleaned, vertical and horizontal vents to deal with the mold issue. But what you may not know is that the plate covers that go on the vent are all being replaced, and they're being replaced with vent covers that have fire dampers within them. So that if there is a certain level of heat, it would prevent the fire from spreading. And I understand that NYCHA's ensured that every new plate cover that goes up, and it's supposed to be all of them, will have the fire dampers.
Thank you for that update, too. Thank you so much, Director Caro, for that update, and we're really appreciate your collaboration with the monitors team on working to identify key places to start spreading this important message, and all of the work you do in the community to keep everybody safe. So thank you for that. So lastly, we want to use our last few minutes to go around the room for those CAC members who haven't presented yet to just introduce yourself and remind us all what issue you're looking on or anything you want to update or add. If we could just keep it to a minute, we'll just go around quickly. So I'll start with NYCHA Regional Asset Manager Brenda Allen.
Hi, so the project that I was originally given was to try to work on improving the communication between developments, property management, and the resident associations. There is some progress, and I'm glad to say that, because we're, from NYCHA's perspective, we are initiating where the development managers have to meet with the resident association presidents monthly. There is a standardized form that they must list the minutes of these meetings. It's going around. It might not have reached every borough yet, but it's in the process. And I think that's a positive for now.
That is good to hear, because from what I've heard so far, it had been inconsistent. Some managers were great about meeting with the tenant association presidents, some were not so great. So I'm glad to hear that that's being mandated from on high, so that's important. Thank you for that update. And I want to take this next opportunity to welcome NYCHA Resident Engagement Department Manager Gina Watkins. She's been with NYCHA since 1987, so we really appreciate you joining the CAC and the wealth of information and experience you have. What we did on our first meeting as a CAC was go around and just say why you're here and what you think you can add. So I hate to put you on the spot, but if you could just give us a quick line.
Okay, so I'm a manager for resident engagement. I oversee the entire Brooklyn area. We're working closely with CCOP and, trying to put together agreements that would be beneficial for NYCHA and, the residents as well. So that's definitely something that we're working hard with and looking forward to, working it out. I have been around a long time, and I'm currently working in the capacity of working with resident associations in Brooklyn, also with elections citywide, and I have a team who works with the resident associations regularly, one-on-ones and leadership meetings and things to that nature. And it's gone pretty well, and we're still working to tweak whatever concerns that's out there, because there are some concerns, and we are working to make it better for both, for NYCHA and the residents. So,
Thank you and welcome.
thank you.
Next, I want to turn to DYCD Associate Commissioner Darrell Rattray.
Trying to think anything I can quickly add. Point of information, we've been running census workshops, job fair workshops at currently 18 of our cornerstone programs in NYCHA developments. My last count, when we were at 11 workshops completed, we had 254 residents attend and 174 actually sign up for jobs. So that was my last count when there was 11 completed. We should have updated numbers within the next few days. Echoing Haley's presentation earlier, just emphasis that Cornerstone made 10 years. In my 10 years of Cornerstone, this is the first time that we've had conversations around how do we, and what's the mechanism to give providers the funding to complete some of the work directly. And again, as Haley mentioned, we're looking at that from the perspective of the settlement houses who have the infrastructure to actually do it, and then the smaller organizations who don't have the infrastructure but have the will to want to do it. So we're taking a comprehensive look at that to figure out how can we activate properly. And the 51%, if there's a development, just for the record, if there's a development where we believe that our programming, whether it's after-school, summer camp, teen services, adult programming, is not meeting the 51% threshold, please email me, let us know. We can try to work on that. We know that grandkids are coming from other.
You know I will.
So that's right.
Thank you for that update. And next, Resident Association President Joel Gross.
I would like to thank the federal monitor, Mr. Schwartz. Since we are now 1 year accomplishment, what we accomplished about the heat and hot water, less complaints about the heat and hot water. Even we have complaints, the speeding of resolving the issue is a lot faster from before. So right now I want to go back to the civil system and the recertification. As we know, with the civil system, we have a couple issues. One of the issues what we have is with the timing. People will submit interim change or annual recertification. A lot of senior citizens losing the job or or is retired. They put in an interim change for reducing the rent, and it takes a lot of times forever. It should be calculated, and a lot of times the residents, senior citizens, have to pay a lot more what they're supposed to pay. A lot of residents, especially seniors, is living on a Social Security check, and a lot of times pay extra $100, $200 for residents is a lot. So with that issue, I was in communication with Eva. Thank you for your time. And I think for the best benefit will be for NYCHA if we create like a database, dashboard on the civil system. Every manager can see if a request is done. Let's say for internal change, how many days is the request made? 7 days, 10 days. First of all, we should put in place a time frame for every interim change, or even a certification should be 30 days, 60 days. Interim for a senior citizen should be maybe in a week if somebody is losing the job, because every single month is counting. And to remove a family member in case of a death is the same thing, because we're counting the income. It should be like in 7 days or maybe 2 weeks. And that dashboard should have all changes done, how many days is in the system. They should be automatically created every single time a tenant is walking into the office to put in a request for a tenant change or rent adjustment. The office should be required in the 24 hours to put it into the system if it's not done with the NYCHA portal automatically with the computer. And this should be timed every single week. Probably the RAM or board of directors should get an email similar like we have right now with the heating system. Every morning, every RAM or board of director gets an email how many outages it is, how many tenants is getting affected. The same thing, if we're going to have on our civil system, first of all, the manager will see how many tenants is not completing the recertification. It's going to be a lot of better with the management housing assistance. And also the RAM or the board of directors will see how many profiles is not completed for a long time. They will have, so it will be faster. They will act into the management office and asking, let's say, this is like 30 days, 45 days, 60 days, 90 days, what's happened with these profiles? And also, we have, NYCHA have the CCC system. I think tenants should be able to call and having a complaint. I put in for interim change, it's like 90 days already in the system for 3 months. We never had back from NYCHA. And that complaint should get to a supervisor or to the board of director from each borough or from each neighborhood. So probably that will speed up the entire NYCHA's portal, and a lot of issues will be resolved with tenants and with management. And as well, I think should be for interim change or add in or remove, we should have an instruction sheet. If a tenant comes to the office and they want to add in a child, a grandchild, or get married, We should give them a sheet. This is exactly what is required, let's say a photo ID, social security card, proof of income. Have a checklist done. When they will come back to the office, if there's everything checked off with all attached documents, that is one time a resident goes to the office, everything can get submitted and approved on timely. It's not like the tenant's going back and forth to the office every time something else is missing. That's going to be beneficial for the tenants as well for the management office.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Mr. Gross, because that's really an important issue to just give clarity and efficiency to the process. So hopefully NYCHA is taking those types of comments to heart and is working on that in your transformation process. Next, I'm actually going to skip Mr. Hall and go to Resident Association President Tamika Williams-Moore, please.
So I've been talking about construction and communication. And so I know that one thing that we've been stressing is transparency. Transparency and communication is what I'm talking about. It's not enough to just say, here, this is the information. The information has to be relayed. It has to be relayed on different levels because everyone has a different learning curve. Everyone has a different education level. And so when we talk about transparency and communication in construction, we're talking about local law 11. When residents come outside their door and they see scaffolding up, and you go to the development manager, and the development manager can't give you any information about what's going on because the local law 11 department within NYCHA has not translated that information to the development manager, so that development manager cannot in turn relay that information to the resident lead. I appreciate that NYCHA is now enforcing the fact that the resident leads should meet with the managers, but if the managers have no information to relay, what are we really doing here? Is this a fun time? Is this tea time? What type of conversations are we having? We need to be able to disseminate that information to the residents. When these capital projects are being developed for these individual developments, the residents need to know. They need to be a part of what's going on. And a lot of times, what's happening is everyone's in 250 Broadway in the Sky office, they're all together and all of these plans are being drawn up, but on a management level, they have no clue as to what's going on. That's a problem. So if we're all going to be footing our part, it has to start with transparency and communication. It has to be relayed so that it can trickle down to the places where it needs to get.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. And next I want to turn to, we have a fill-in, and we appreciate you being here, Commander Creighton from NYCHA, NYPD Housing Bureau. So if you could please introduce yourself and give us an update on security issues.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. Kieran Creighton, Inspector of Police, CO of Manhattan Housing. On behalf of Commissioner Shea and Chief Barrera and Chief Capocci, once again lied to me and told me I wouldn't have to say anything. So you told me when we first started, don't just be another pretty face at the table, but I'm certainly prepared. So, Mr. Schwartz, we're working very hard in Manhattan under my jurisdiction to try and prevent a federal monitor. Nothing personal, but if we can sit down and fix these issues before a guy like yourself comes in, certainly we're ahead of it. But a lot of the things that have been discussed tonight, we're working very hard in Manhattan and with my counterparts throughout the city. We're talking about the $125 million. And so as I sit here as a member of the police department and we say, what does this have to do with the safety of the residents? It has everything to do with the safety of the residents. That study after study that I read is that if we're living in a safe environment and we're taking care of where we live, whether it's painting or the garden or the park, it shows that crime goes down in these areas. So certainly in Manhattan housing right now, we're struggling with some issues of youths that are committing some robberies, and we're working very hard to help the kids that want help and to try and discipline and stop some of the kids that are acting criminally along with their parents and whatever other resources may be out there. So these, and then you mentioned the shooting that happened in the Bronx. When we started, Mr. Schwartz gave the shout out to Chief Capocci. The gun violence is always on the top of our list, and we get the job together done with the community. So those are our concerns, and concerns around the table here, and together we solve these issues.
Exactly. Thank you so much. We appreciate that. And lastly, Mr. Hall, will you wrap us up with a minute to give an update on any other remaining issues?
Well, no, I just want to applaud what transpired this evening, because this, in each issue that was brought up, the word transparency always comes in. This dialogue is urgently necessary, and it just goes for all the topics of major concern. The funding, all right, the leases, in every aspect, all right, transparency is urgently necessary. It was mentioned about the managers getting involved and having the TA presidents meet. I saw Ms. Ortiz just put her head down. But in any event, it's these things, transparency is urgently necessary in all aspects, all right? It also goes, and Ms. Trimble and I, we've already had dialogue with regards to some of the upcoming consolidated circumstances, and we'll talk about that again tomorrow. But we're on top of that in its entirety with the hopes of doing what's in the best interest of the residents involved as far as each situation is concerned.
Yes, I think you hit it on the head. Focusing on the best interests of the residents is everyone's top
That's
priority.
what this is about.
Exactly. Ms. Ortiz, did you want to weigh in?
I just want to give a shout out to PSA 4. The officers in PSA 4 are amazing. I've never met the commanding officer, but the officers are amazing. The NCOs have such great communication skills, not only with the resident leadership, but with the residents themselves.
I agree.
They have that 24/7. Here's my cell phone number, any issues, any problems, call me, and the residents do. So I have to say thank you and applaud them, because they're doing an excellent and an amazing job in their PSA 4 sector. Thank you.
Thank you, appreciate that.
Mr. Gross?
Would like just to add in what we speak before about the altered schedule. What I hear from night shift employees, if they have to arrive a lot of times 6 in the morning, very early in the morning to work the 12-hour shifts, a lot of from that employees will not feel safe. It's
Okay.
dark outside and they're not feeling safe, and a lot of work, let's say if a ground people's arriving early, they don't can start cleaning the grounds, they're gonna wake up everybody with a blower, and it's a waste of time. That's what night shift
Thank
employees.
you. And then lastly, I just wanted to remind everyone, you each have a copy of this most recent quarterly report. If you have not read it yet, please do so. It's actually our shortest report to date, but it is really dense. And so we appreciate your input, your thoughts, as we continue to move forward with the monitorship and even the action plans that are up on the website. Please review them. They're living documents, so we appreciate your input, your thoughts. And most importantly, we need all of you and everyone watching through the live stream to be our eyes and ears on the ground, to let us know, are these things being truly implemented? Are they working? And, you know, a lot of things can look good on paper, but how are they really being implemented in real time, in real life, is what really matters. And so the work of the CAC is also to be the watchdogs, if you will. So I definitely appreciate everyone rolling up your sleeves, all of the calls with me in the interim, all of the collaboration around the room is really appreciated. Bart?
I want to make sure I get the last word.
Please.
I just wanted to say that when the idea of a CAC was first presented, we really didn't know what it would be or exactly how we would do it. And so we're really inventing this. And sometimes process sometimes isn't the most exciting thing to talk about, but I really think this process has been terrific. The value here is remarkable, everyone's hard work and contributions, and I really want to thank you all very much, and we're going to continue to do this, combine it with the community meetings, and make progress. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.